Hello, DawgNation. Brandon Adams here, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Quick story. We do a microphone check before the show begins every day just to make sure everything's in kind of working order. And on our mic check this morning, I failed to correctly count to 10 to give you an idea of maybe what kind of mode we're in here on the day before the 4th of July. But have no fear. We were not great in practice, but we're going to be awesome during the actual show here. Jeff Sentell coming up as part of our DawgNation Daily Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All on the Tuesday. Jeff, of course, in Frisco Tax for the opening. A lot of recruiting info for him. In fact, we'll actually begin the show with a little recruiting talk here as well. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of my favorite things when you're driving home from vacation, or maybe you've been, outside the state of Georgia, really for whatever reason, is that when you come back to the state line, and honestly, I don't know if this is still true, but I know it was true as recently as a couple of years ago. I would notice this. When you get back to the state line, those big signs there on the highway that welcome you back to Georgia. I used to love this phrase, and I still do, assuming it's still used. We're glad Georgia's on your mind. For some reason, I've always thought that was kind of a cool phrase for Georgia. I am a proud Georgian. I like being from this state. I love the song, Georgia, about being on your mind, and I do like that phrase. We're glad Georgia's on your mind, and I could not help but think about that in regards to kind of something that happened yesterday in the state of Alabama, because Georgia is clearly on the mind of some in Alabama here. And if you're a Georgia fan, I don't think there's anything to be mad about here. I think, if anything, you may get a little laugh, a little chuckle, at least a bit of a wry smile here as you see the extent to which some Alabama fans are still thinking about the Dogs here, despite the fact that Alabama's the reigning national champion. Something about the way that Georgia's had success with recruits as of late. Maybe a bit of a thorn in the side, a spur in the saddle, whatever cliched analogy you want to use here. Pretty clearly, Alabama, some folks in Alabama still thinking about UGA. Let me tell you why I say this, and then we'll have some fun with this. Jason Jones is a very good prospect for the class of 2020. Really good defensive line guy here. And yesterday, in a really cool video from our friends over there at AL.com, he announced his commitment to Alabama. I thought this was a very well-done video. Really good job of telling his story. There's kind of a theatrical element here to the video, which I thought was pretty good. But there is a moment at the end where it can be said that Jones, who really most Georgia fans, and I go to a lot of message boards, I go to our forum every day at forum.DawgNation.com. I mean, Georgia fans have just not been talking about Jason Jones at all as a potential member to Georgia's 2020 class. This is not a recruit of real consequence for UGA. A very highly rated recruit, but this is not a guy a lot of Georgia fans have been pining for a long time. But nonetheless, when Jones made his announcement of Alabama yesterday, he took a little bit of a moment to at least troll Georgia here just a bit. Let me let you see this, because I think there's something important for us to get to in terms of what Jason Jones does with the folks from AL.com. So take a quick look at this, or if you're listening to our show, radio or podcast, or hear the audio, and then we'll talk about it. Here it is.
And that's why it's time for me to make my own choice and find my new home. Go Dawg! Get out of the field!
Hold up. Y'all didn't think he was going to leave the state, did you? No. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
So listen, I can't be mad about that. I don't want to call myself out here as a hypocrite, because if I were to get upset about what Jason Jones did there, then it would be wrong for me to have enjoyed what Quay Walker did back in February. And y'all know I did enjoy that. I love the Quay Walker hat toss for Tennessee. I love Georgia flipping him from Alabama. I enjoyed that then, so it would be somewhat hypocritical of me to say, enjoyed that then, mad about this now. The truth is, as I said before, I'm not mad about this at all. I don't think the Georgia fans ought to be mad about it either. This is not a player that, there was a post on the forum at forum.DawgNation.com about this yesterday before Jones made his decision. Most Georgia fans weren't even really looking at him as an option for a UGA recruiting class, but nonetheless, in his commitment video, he decided to have a little fun at Georgia's expense on this, which just gives you an idea about how Alabama, future players of the program, current fans, boosters, maybe people within the football department right now, they still just have Georgia on their mind just a bit. And for Georgia fans, and listen, we've been right there with this in terms of what we talked about here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. There has legitimately been some concern about the nature of defensive line recruiting. And in one respect, Jones going to Bama here would be an example of another opportunity missed for UGA. Another guy seemingly that Georgia loses out on. But y'all know, and Jeff Sentell's been telling us this when he's been on our program, there are still no shortage of options out there for what Georgia might be able to bring in over the course of the next recruiting cycle, next two recruiting cycles. Let me start with 2019 here for a moment. Trayvon Walker's getting closer to decision. There has been nothing to change the fact that Walker, despite the fact that he has taken some visits and has talked up other schools, there's been nothing to change the fact that most people view Walker as a strong Georgia lean. Arguably, the most important player for Georgia's 2019 class could be Trayvon Walker. And trust me, when Trayvon Walker makes his announcement, nobody's going to be remembering anything that some 2020 kid from Alabama said during his recruiting video. There's also the possibility out there that Chris Hinton might one day flip from his current Michigan commitment. After all, we've seen Georgia do that before with Otis Reese from a year ago, but that's another name that would seem to be kind of floating out there for the Georgia Bulldogs. To say nothing of Byron Young, who Jeff Sentell has written about at DawgNation, from the state of Mississippi. That's a name that's kind of out there. Yes, Derek Hunter recently committed to Florida State, but, Jeff Sentell has once again come back here on DawgNation and written the fact that he believes that that Georgia's still very much in the chase and the pursuit of Derek Hunter, and this may be a recruitment that is far from over, despite the public pledge that Hunter has to Florida State. Same thing for another Florida State commit, Quayshawn Fuller. It sounds like Georgia's very much in the mix there. So a lot of 2019 options for Georgia at the defensive line position, and 2020 is just as stacked with potential additions. If anything, the in-state variety may be more intriguing for 2020 than what 2019 brought to the table. Jamil Burrows is the guy that we've started to talk about a lot. He is from Hillgrove High School there in Powder Springs. That's a guy who it seems like has a pretty strong relationship with Georgia, and that's also a prospect that it seems like there are a lot of reasons for Georgia fans to like. Another guy from Hillgrove, or I should say another guy from Powder Springs, although different high school, is Miles Murphy. That's a 2020 guy that Georgia has spent a lot more time recruiting, I would say, than Jason Jones, who chose Alabama and had a little fun at Georgia's expense in the middle of that choice. You've got Andy Boykin, who could eventually flip from Auburn to UGA. He's spoken about that as a possibility, which is to also say nothing of the nation's #1 prospect for 2020, and a guy that DawgNation and Jeff Sentell caught up with at the opening here this week. I'm talking about Brian Brizzy. Now, Brizzy, yes, does have a pretty strong relationship with Ohio State. I won't pretend to deny that, but this is a guy who visited Georgia for G-Day and has had seemingly a pretty deep bond with Georgia ever since. Some of this extends to his family. Some of this extends with Brizzy to the players that he might be playing with at UGA. Let me show you one quote in particular here. Brizzy talking to Jeff Sentell about one of the things that he likes about Georgia, and one of the names that comes up here is Nolan Smith, who we spent a lot of time talking about on our program yesterday. Smith, a very good player, but also a very strong recruiter for UGA, and pretty clearly the pitch from Nolan Smith to Brian Brizzy seems to work here. If you're listening, I'll read this. If you're watching, you can see it on the screen. Brizzy says to Jeff Sentell, "I've talked to a bunch of people who are really thinking about Georgia." He means other 2020 recruits. "And I will just say that if I could play with them," or he also says him, which he means Nolan Smith, "and play with them, the other players that are thinking about Georgia, then it would be a lot of fun." That's Brian Brizzy, nation's #1 prospect for 2020, talking to Jeff Sentell from the opening out in Texas about what pulls him to Georgia. In that same piece, and by the way, you should go read it, in that same piece, Brizzy talks also a lot about what his family likes about UGA. So there are plenty of defensive line opportunities for Georgia, both in 2019 and 2020, that give Georgia fans no reason to worry about an Alabama in-state recruit trolling Georgia with his commitment video. But to bring things back here to Jason Jones for a minute, what was kind of interesting about the decision that he made yesterday, and the real reason why I played that quick snippet of the video that we did play, is that if you go to Jason Jones' Twitter feed and sort of the aftermath of this, he got the sort of natural criticism that comes when you have kind of a high-profile commitment. That's just to be expected. But if you really look at some of the tweets that he has had and some of the tweets he's responded to, A lot of what ends up happening there is it becomes a bit of a referendum on, did Kirby Smart negatively recruit him towards Georgia? Some unfounded accusations in that regard. Jason Jones had to respond to those publicly, and it's really kind of a weird thing that if you look at the Twitter feed of Jones, there's probably more talk about Georgia in the last 12 hours than there is about Alabama. Now, as we've said before here on our program, we don't think that Georgia's in a position to have to negatively recruit anybody right now. Not Jason Jones, not any of the players that Georgia's going to add for the class of 2019 and 2020. And frankly, we think here on this program that it's a little bit ridiculous how worried some folks in Alabama seem to be about the University of Georgia. I mean, if you want to go back to the SEC spring meetings here in Destin, Florida, when Kirby Smart spoke in May, he was asked about, hey, are you negatively recruiting? Or what do you say about the fact that Nick Saban hears from recruits that people are saying bad things about him on the recruiting trail? Kirby Smart says, I don't have to do that to win with recruits. Here's Kirby.
Negative recruiting, to me, never works on the kind of kids and the people you want in your program. Because if they're listening to that and they buy into that, they're probably a little gullible. Where I would much rather just be very honest and open, because you attract better quality people who respect the fact that you respect the other people in your league.
So listen, here is the bottom line for me on this entire discussion. For the most part, I think all is fair and in good fun when it comes with commitment decisions and announcement videos included. I don't have a problem with what the kid here did going to Alabama. I didn't mind it when Quay Walker threw the hat for Tennessee. This is sort of the one chance to sort of participate in some theatrics, and I'm not sort of scandalized really by any of this. But the fact that some in Alabama, including a 2020 commit to the program, this worried about Georgia, thinking about Georgia this much to include that in a recruiting video when you commit to Alabama, that seems to indicate to me that Georgia must be doing something right here if Alabama's this worried. As the sign says on the road, in this case, it truly is good that Georgia's on their mind. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're glad you're with us on video, live every morning, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook page, YouTube page, DawgNation Twitter feed. We're on the radio at noon every day with our friends in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We'll tell you that we are preempted on the radio tomorrow in honor of the Independence Day holiday. We're actually all taking the day off tomorrow to be with family and friends. Hope you're getting a chance to do the same thing. We'll look forward to being back with you on a regular schedule again on Thursday. So enjoy the fireworks. Try not to burn down your house, and we'll see you back here on Thursday for a DawgNation Daily. But no radio, no video, no podcast tomorrow for the Independence Day holiday. But today, though, there's still plenty of our program left. You can check it out in podcast form if that's your medium of choice. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, pretty much everywhere you want to go. The world-famous DawgNation.com. We're really glad you've chosen to be a part of DawgNation Daily here today. And really thankful for Marco's Pizza making it all possible. And right now, they invite you to say hello primo with a great offer. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. If you're looking for a way to feed your family on the holiday, that is a great choice there. But it's not just, regular any old pizza. It's authentic Italian quality pizza. Every store, every day, the Italian way. That's the promise they make to you there at Marco's. You can go to Marcos.com and find the Marco's nearest you and find out how you can take advantage of that great offer for 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. We're going to get Jeff Sentell here in just a moment. We'll talk more to him about the really, really interesting quotes that he got from Brian Brizzy and some of the other stuff from the opening here. Awesome stuff from Jaden Hazelwood. I mean, really fascinating there. Interesting on John Emery Jr. This is going to be a really detailed conversation with Jeff Sentell. He has killed it at the opening this week, and I'm not just saying that and the sort of typical company-approved PR message here. No, Jeff really has hit a home run with what he's done there at the opening, and I can't wait to talk to him about all of that. Before we get to that, though, there is this, and let me go away from recruiting just for a moment and deal with some of the stuff on the field. I think that one of the players that Georgia fans are most excited about seeing here for the 2018 season in an expanded role based on where he was a year ago, that's the sophomore running back from Philadelphia, DeAndre Swift. We saw him do big things in spots and flashes during his freshman season of 2017, and there's reason to believe that more good things could be in store in 2018. In fact, ESPN, in its recent release of all of its preseason top 25 teams' most exciting player, they described DeAndre Swift as Georgia's most exciting player, and here is the reason why ESPN is so high on DeAndre Swift. I'll show you the quote here. It is Alex Scarborough, who is the writer, writing about DeAndre Swift. What he says is that Sony Michel and Nick Chubb were special, but if you thought they were alone in Georgia's backfield last season, you weren't paying attention. As a freshman, DeAndre Swift showed why coaches have been enamored with his potential, showing off home run speed and a 7.8 yards per carry clip with 3 rushes of 40 yards or more. And that big playability is something that DeAndre Swift showed a lot there in 2017. The expectation is that he might show it in 2018. And I don't know that there's any play that sort of embodies what Swift might be able to do in a full season more than the touchdown against Auburn that put that SEC championship on ice. It was a beautiful moment for Georgia fans and was described perfectly after the game by Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Let me let you hear Fromm talking about how impressed he was with the excitement level that Swift showed in the SEC championship. Take a listen.
Holy cow. All right, so he was supposed to run to the right. All right, and I take the ball, obviously I give the handoff to him, and he starts taking off to the left. And in my mind, I'm like, man, what are you doing? That joker takes off, and I look, there's a huge hole. Man, he makes a move on the guy, that joker takes off. That's just awesome. The guy, he didn't run it in the right spot. It doesn't matter. Just the guy making a play. DeAndre Swift, man, go Dogs.
I love that from Jake Fromm. I love his unbridled enthusiasm describing the excitement level that DeAndre Swift showed, and it's kind of funny. Knowing we were going to be talking about this here today, I was actually getting ready for the show, looking on one of our TVs at DawgNation World Headquarters here, and their SEC Network was actually showing a replay of the SEC Championship, and right when I looked up, the DeAndre Swift touchdown was on the screen there. That's kind of a nice thing to think about, and it's also nice to think about DeAndre Swift maybe as Georgia's most exciting player here for 2018. I think there's a really good chance that ESPN might be right about that, but as a lot of Georgia fans will also remind you, there are a few other pretty good candidates in this regard as well. We'll look forward to talking with them all in the days ahead. All right, it's Brandon Adams here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Great to have you with us. Hope you enjoy right now a little recruiting talk with Jeff Sentell. And we will get Jeff here coming up in just a moment. Jeff being corralled there in Frisco, Texas, no doubt. Busy covering all the ins and outs and the twists and turns when it comes to UGA recruiting. So we'll check in with Jeff on that as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. And I mentioned this before. There is a lot to get to with Jeff today. I want to do a good bit with him on Brian Brizzy. The John Emery stuff is fascinating. Is Georgia about to get 2 running backs from Louisiana? That seems like a pretty difficult needle to thread here. But there has been a lot on that as of late. I think that Jeff's actually ready to go. So let's dive in with him. You're going to enjoy this. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, and we're glad you're with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
It is our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, and this is not just any version of the Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. It is Jeff Sentell in Frisco, Texas for the opening. And, Jeff, I said this before you came on, and you're obviously a friend, and I'm proud of the work that you do for DawgNation every single day. But this opening stuff has been great. I'm going to chew it up with you here, whether it be John Emery, the Jaden Hazelwood stuff, really fascinating, emotional even in some respects. Brian Brizzy, who we kind of touched on a bit before you joined us. There has been no shortage of kind of bold print, eye-popping quotes for Georgia fans to sink their teeth into based on your last few days there at the Cowboys complex, correct?
Brandon, are you there, man?
I am. Yeah, we were talking about how great the coverage has been of the opening so far. Really good stuff with all the various luminaries you've had a chance to catch up to.
Yeah, man, it's different. This is the first year it's been in Texas. And they say everything's bigger in Texas. But, my kind of feeling, obviously this event's for the athletes and not the media that attend it. But it feels a little bit sterilized now in the land of all things cowboy. If you go to certain restaurants, and what Jerry Jones has kind of done is he's turned their practice headquarters, mind you, not where they actually play the games, but their practice. Like imagine Flowery Branch and the Atlanta Falcons putting basically the Battery right around where the Falcons have their practice headquarters and training camp. That's what the Cowboys have done. They've got outdoor plazas. Certain restaurants, well, not certain restaurants, every restaurant has to have the same 2 or 3 Cowboys sponsor, whether it's a beverage, whether it's a certain adult beverage, Pepsi, not Coke. Just lots of things there. And there has to be one TV in the sports bars or restaurants at all times turned to the Cowboys network. It is a marketing juggernaut, to say the least.
Well, what you cannot get at that Cowboys complex is the Scofflaw Brewing Marlowe's Tavern IPA, because that's only available at Marlowe's Tavern. And, Jeff, I had one of these a couple weeks ago. It is a great, great beer, a great way to celebrate summer, and it's something to think about as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern tell-all here as we talk about the events of the opening here on DawgNation Daily today. And, Jeff, one of the things we spoke about a couple of minutes ago was Brian Brizzy, the nation's #1 prospect for 2020, a guy that there's been sort of all kinds of online chatter about as of late, maybe a growing relationship with Ohio State. But as your quotes pointed out this week, both in what Brizzy told you and what Brizzy's family, his dad included, also said about University of Georgia, the connection that the Brizzys have with Georgia is still quite strong, and that to me is one of the big takeaways of almost anything else that goes on here this week. The strong connection that the Brizzy family still sees with Georgia, I think, is one of the most significant pieces of news to come out of this weekend.
I think the other thing, Brendan, the way we wrote about it yesterday, is there's just a lot of warm and fuzzies, and that's not my word. That is a word that was used from a member of the Brizzy family regarding that visit. And that's very interesting. Now you take, I learned this week that not only did his sister, his older sister, Bailey, tell him that Georgia was her favorite, but she had a Georgia wristlet, a wristband that she put on while she was at G-Day, and she's told her brother she's not going to take that sucker off until he commits to Georgia. And, that's a good little older sister. That's a good little ally in the corner there, to say the least. And then you have Nolan Smith and Brian Brizzy. Nolan Smith is just doing Nolan Smith things. He is accommodating. He is cordial. Those two are cutting it up like football players and boys always do. So it's interesting to watch what's happening here. Probably one of the things that it just kind of looks, Brandon, the way guys interact. You can't always capture it on video, but it just sounds like maybe one of the better benefits for a school at the opening is getting their commitment to really fraternize with uncommitted targets. And that's definitely what Nolan Smith is doing.
So, Jeff, I don't make any bones about the fact that I would hope that Brizzy chooses Georgia, and I guess in those regards, what my concern would be, clearly there's a pull for Brizzy towards Nolan Smith while they're together, but, Brizzy lives in Maryland, Nolan Smith's from Savannah, goes to high school in Florida. Is Nolan Smith going to have enough FaceTime with Brizzy in the months ahead to deal with all that Ohio State attention that Brizzy's going to get once he gets out of Texas and gets back towards home? I guess for the Georgia partisan here, that's the one concern of, is Nolan Smith going to have enough opportunity to interact with Brizzy for this to really go down before Nolan ends up at Georgia and Brizzy makes his decision next December?
Yeah, Brandon, I think Georgia fans and Georgia people, they can't have it both ways. The thing with Xavier Thomas and Nolan Smith when they were at IMG Academy together, that thing was going to separate eventually when he went to Clemson. And what's really going to have to happen here is that Georgia is going to have to market itself and present itself to Brian based on just how good and great the fit is and all things else. I think the interactions with Nolan are simply a very nice side story, which kind of adds to the lure, I guess, of getting the chance to play with a guy that he already seems very familiar with at Georgia. I think that's really going to make the mark, and not really just constant recruiting by Nolan Smith on Brian.
If you ask me, as a longtime sort of fan of college football and sort of observer of the SEC, if you ask me to pick the state that I believe it might be hardest for Georgia to go into and get a player out of, I believe that Louisiana might actually be the #1 state on my list, just given how far away it is from UGA, the fact that Georgia does not have a long history of players from Louisiana, with all apologies to Terrell Vieira, I guess, and, LSU's just a recruiting behemoth there in that state. And yet when I read what John Emery Jr., the elite running back from Louisiana, is saying, this week about Georgia, all of a sudden this does seem like a truly real possibility, and maybe LSU's not even the silver medalist here. I mean, what do you make, having been face-to-face with Emery? The quotes were certainly provocative at DawgNation. What do you make of the Dawg's relationship with John Emery Jr. right now?
Well, first of all, Brandon, this is going to be a very, very steep mountain for Georgia and Dell McGee, but there are little things, like Georgia was his first offer in terms of John Emery, and I guess I dropped something on the message board last night because there were some reader responses and they wanted to know about a certain things. And this is what it feels like to me, Brandon. When I was at the opening last year, and everybody was so hook, line, and sinker wanting to talk about quarterbacks and Matt Corral and Justin Fields. I left the opening, or I even went into the opening, with the distinct impression that I thought Georgia was going to get one of the two, and it might even, as it turns out, it was going to be Georgia's choice. So the thing here with the running backs is I think there are 4 terrific running backs. What I've seen out of the last few days at the opening, I think there's a distinct pecking order where it goes John Emery Jr. barely, and then Tyrion Davis, which is Ty Davis. That's the LSU commitment who grew up 5 minutes outside Tiger Stadium. These will be tough pulls, but at the end of the day, I do think Georgia will get one of those 4, and it simply might be a matter of this guy's going here, this guy's there, this guy decides to go there, and then somebody's going to look at Georgia or look at one of the other contenders here, like an Alabama, an LSU, a Mississippi State, maybe even a Texas, and they'll go, wow, that's a open A-gap, B-gap. The opportunity to play for them and play for that program is right there, and I'm going to take advantage of it. Right now, Brandon, I'm just telling you how I feel. It feels to me like Georgia's going to wind up with one of those 4 elite running backs for 2019. And one thing our coverage has been able to do while we're out here in Texas this week, kind of unabashedly say that if Georgia doesn't get Trey Saunders or Noah Cain, maybe the major food group backs that everybody's been talking about, even on our show, I think that's going to be not just okay. I think it would be splendid if they ended up with a guy like John Emery Jr., who I think, with a big-time tip of the cap to Trey Sanders here, I think John Emery Jr. is the best back in the country.
That's a really interesting statement to make as part of our Marlowe's Tavern tell-all. And speaking of Marlowe's Tavern here, this 4th of July weekend, if you're looking for a place to go get some great summer-inspired cocktails, I put the watermelon margarita there at your local Marlowe's Tavern. You're going to love that. I also like the Kansas City strip steak that's on the menu here this summer. It comes with a twice-baked potato. That is an awesome menu item and a great way to have dinner with the people that you care about here on this holiday week. Now, I did notice you said something there, and I want to kind of transition the conversation to a Ty Davis here a bit. You said you think that Georgia gets one of those 4 between the 2 Louisiana kids and the 2 IMG kids. I guess there was a part of an assumption on me because of the fact that Davis is rated a bit below the other 3 in this conversation. We talked about him yesterday on our program based on some of the reporting that you had done out there from Texas, that maybe it might be a Ty Davis plus a John Emery or a Ty Davis plus an IMG running back like Sanders or Cain. Clearly, Davis is in Georgia's plans here because of what he told you about the amount of time that he spent with Dale McGee. But is this a 2 of 4 situation, or is this a 1 of 4 situation when it comes to a Georgia and elite 2019 running backs right now?
Oh, Brandon, man, the farther I get away from you and the more area codes I'm away from you, the more you stay the same. You want them all, brother. And Ty Davis is just going to be very hard. We did report that he's going to give Georgia an official. I think the only scenario that seems feasible for Ty Davis and Georgia is going to be, that might be one of those late Monty Rice-like flips because he is inside his home state. Would not be comfortable living quarters for him to choose Georgia and then walk around and go around town as an LSU flip for a few days, or even a few weeks. So, Ty Davis really impresses me because he's 6'1", 225. He's sick fast, man. He's ran a 10.77 in the 100. I've seen this week that he can handle that stuff out of the backfield. He can catch the ball a little bit. And, the thinking there for Georgia, Brandon, and it might just be your favorite sauce on your favorite item at Marlowe's Tavern, is Georgia's going to take that big line, those hog mollies like Andrew Thomas, Jamari Salyer, Trey Hill, Warren Erickson, Isaiah Wilson. They're going to take all those big dudes up front. And mind you, they want to get a 225 power back like a Ty Davis coming downhill behind them as well. And that's just going to wear on people in the SEC, and that's going to be some good kind of physics for Sam Pittman Jim Chaney and Kirby Smart.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You wrote about Jaden Hazelwood. Hazelwood's obviously one of the very popular topics when it comes to this 2019 class. Not only is he the nation's #1 wide receiver, but he's a real position of need for Georgia, I believe, moving forward here. But he's also, I guess, stirred up some emotions from some Georgia fans because he's taken a lot of visits. Well, you kind of cast a different light on those visits this week with what you got from Hazelwood there in Texas. Now, Jeff, I hope people read the piece that you wrote at DawgNation.com about Jaden Hazelwood, what he's dealt with in his personal life with the loss of a close friend. But that does give some different perspective on how this recruiting process internally for Hazelwood is playing out a whole lot different than sort of outside the perspective that some of us seem to have on that. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to read this because that's me kind of fulfilling my mission statement about what I try to do here for the website, and that is kind of take the helmet off a lot of these young people. And I'm just going to set it up by saying this. Hazelwood has been through what he tells me is the most trying period of his life over the last 1 to 2 months, and it is something very heartfelt. And he has used some of these trips any which way, any which direction he's gone. He's used those trips as a distraction from getting away from the pain of losing a dear, dear friend.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very emotional thing. Now, I will also say, as a way of playing devil's advocate here, even if there are visits sort of, spurred on by the desire to kind of get away from a tough situation, they are still visits and still an opportunity for another program to make its pitch towards him. But what also kind of makes you think about that in a different light, and I was hoping you might expand upon this a bit more, you talked about a relationship that Hazelwood has with another Georgia player, and I think a lot of us think about his close bond with Justin Fields. Fields has talked about Hazelwood before. Hazelwood has talked about Fields, but it's actually also a player on the UGA defense, an incoming freshman, Brenton Cox, who Jaden Hazelwood has a pretty strong relationship with. And I'll admit, if I had known that, I had sort of forgotten that. I guess I didn't quite realize that Brenton Cox had this much pull and this much sway with Jaden Hazelwood, but apparently Hazelwood's pretty impressed with Cox going back to a visit they both took together to Georgia. Would you care to expound upon that a little bit more here?
Yeah, Brandon, I think the thing with Hazelwood in Georgia is that, he basically, I guess the genesis of his
Did we lose Jeff?
I think the genesis right there. I think the genesis, Brandon, right there for Hazelwood in Georgia, as he kind of told me, and I remember this time pretty well, is maybe this was like late January of 2017 where he took a visit to Georgia, and it was an unofficial visit, and Brenton Cox was with him, and his mom was there, and everything just synced up for him. And he told me basically that after that point, he knew he was going to go to Georgia. Brenton Cox was with him. Brenton Cox is there at Georgia right now, of course, and Jaden is looking, I asked him, who he thinks will be the kind of the breakout freshman on defense this year. And it took him about half a hiccup, the time span of about half a pickup to say that without question in his mind, that was going to be Brenton Cox.
All right, Jeff, let me squeeze this in really quick before we let you go here. You're obviously in Frisco, Texas there. Any kind of final thoughts from you about kind of what you've seen this week? Anything that you think the Georgia fans ought to be thinking about here, or anything that just sort of sticks out in your mind that I didn't ask you about?
Well, there's a lot, actually. I might go on for weeks here if I keep talking to you about it. But, some things that just mushroom in my head is you've got Wanye Morris, the talented offensive tackle from Grayson. He looks like, to me, the #1 tackle in the country. Most of the time, you're going to see, Nolan Smith has been Nolan Smith. Warren McClendon has looked outstanding at times as a right tackle type guy. Quayshawn Fuller has even been able to beat a guy like Cardell Thomas inside at times as well. Trayvon Walker, I put another nugget on the message board late last night. There's a lot of stuff out there where the speculation is that he's going to commit soon. And to me, it just depends on the definition of soon in anyone's own particular vernacular. To me, I don't see that happening anytime in the next 3 weeks to even potentially 2 months. So maybe everyone has to look at the exact definition of soon when it comes to that.
Interesting stuff. I'll also remind you, as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, that starting today, Marlowe's introduces the Granny's Gold Flatbread. Now, the flatbread is one of the things that Marlowe's is most famous for. It comes with Granny Smith apple, smoked beef brisket, chipotle barbecue, cheddar cheese, and applewood smoked bacon, all on top of that flatbread crust. It is really good stuff. Jeff, I'll have to treat you to one of those when you get back in town. Great coverage from the opening here all week long. We'll look forward to chatting with you soon.
Hey, guys, and let me give this one little nugget here. There'll be something on the site that drops sometime today that folks probably wouldn't expect a fellow like me to get from the opening, but that will be a very interesting update on a Georgia target as well.
How about that tease, Jeff? We'll look forward to that. Thanks so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
See, now, he's kind of got my mind wondering I wonder what he's talking about, right? You hear them there at the end, Jeff Sentell saying something dropping on DawgNation.com today, a tidbit that we wouldn't expect here. What is going on with that from Jeff Sentell? I cannot wait to find that out. And, one of the things I like to do from time to time when Jeff's on the program is sort of ask that sort of open-ended question, the kind of thing that Jeff can kind of go with it whichever direction he wants to, because sometimes I'm sort of curious to see, where he heads when I'm not sort of leading the witness. And he mentioned Wanya Morris's name, and I wondered if he would, because I have seen some online chatter about this. A lot of the different recruiting reporters will sort of tweet out their little video snippets of Morris. Morris, as you know, from Grayson High School, a guy that really was not a major recruiting target for Georgia. Georgia seems to like these offensive tackles more like Xavier Truss, who are very big. Wanya Morris, not quite as big, but Mike Johnson's explained before, both on this show and on SEC Country Live, that he loves Morris's film. Georgia just had a little bit different evaluation, but Jeff Sentell just said right there, some of what we've also seen kind of in the online chatter about this is that Wanya Morris may look like the best offensive tackle there at the opening here, and you can't help but wonder, and Georgia's going to be fine with its offensive line. Georgia's got more offensive linemen that can play right now, but is there an evaluation that Georgia made of Morris that just came too late, or is there a significant reason why Georgia's evaluation of Morris was seemingly different than others was? It was a tooth and nail battle between Auburn and Tennessee. Georgia's not really a part of it, but Morris, and based on what I'm obviously not there, but based on what I've been seeing on social media, it does seem like that Wanya Morris equated himself very well there at the opening, and I guess I'm sort of curious to kind of dive into that a little bit more here coming up over the course of the next few days about, what exactly went on between Morris and Georgia, because I've heard nothing but good things about him as a player since he made the decision to choose Tennessee over Auburn in that regard. But we'll have to push that to the side for now. We'll do our SEC through. Of course, SEC Country Live coming up, just like always, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country video channels later on this afternoon. One of the things we talked about yesterday was ESPN did one of these kind of like writer roundtable type things where they addressed the possible number one quarterback in the country on the field here for 2018, and the names that come up are not SEC names. It's it's Will Greer, it's Trace McSorley from Penn State, it's Justin Herbert from Oregon. Guys like Drew Lock, the Missouri quarterback, don't show up on the list. And I've said before, I'm not high on Drew Lock. I'm not worried about Georgia going to Columbia in late September to play that game. And I think part of that's just based on the fact that Derek Dooley, the brand new offensive coordinator in Missouri, I'm assuming he's a pretty significant downgrade in comparison to last year's offensive coordinator Josh Heupel, who's now head coach at UCF. I don't think of Drew Lock as the nation's top player at the quarterback position, but let's face it, he's probably going to be the guy that has the chance of being drafted the highest overall. My knock on him as a QB is mostly in relationship to the fact that I don't think he's going to be asked to make the sort of big pressure-packed throws that guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Jake Fromm and Jared Stidham are going to be asked to make here this season. But speaking of that trio for a moment, Georgia's own Fromm, Tua, Jared Stidham, thinking of these guys, when ESPN does a story about top quarterback in the country for 2018, and they don't mention one of these SEC quarterbacks in a year where the SEC seems to be this deep at the QB position, it's sort of easy to understand and easy to, I think, suggest that maybe ESPN has overlooked the SEC guys just a bit. I don't think it's any kind of intentional malice or anything like that, but I think it's confusing a couple things here. It's conflating big stats, which Will Greer will possibly have, with actual measurable, true success. Will Greer at West Virginia is not going to play in a big game all year long. They're going to go 8-4, 9-3. They're going to score 50 points a game. They're going to give up 65, and that's going to be the story of the season essentially for West Virginia. That may be entertaining to watch, but it's not great in the way that I think of great. And so from that standpoint, I think the SEC guys probably were overlooked just a bit. I'll also mention the Sports Illustrated profile of Jimbo Fisher here. Andy Staples wrote it. I thought it was really actually pretty good. Kind of looking at why Fisher ultimately chose to leave Florida State and go to Texas A&M. And one of the big takeaways here is the dissatisfaction that Fisher had going back to his time at Florida State, and just the hesitation that his bosses at Florida State seem to always have about spending big-time money. And this is obviously a personal story for some Georgia fans as well. They've had some frustrations with the UGA athletic department. I think sometimes, though, that spending money on facilities and shiny new things isn't always the elixir that some people think it is for winning in college football. I think A&M's got plenty of money, but if buying a championship was that easy, A&M would already have one, and Andy Staples kind of touched on that part of the deal there in Sports Illustrated. But it's a pretty good read here looking at how Fisher, a former national championship coach, has found his way into the SEC, trying to revive a program at Texas A&M. And then one final story here for our SEC through. And I'm guessing we'll probably end up doing a little more on this in the days to come here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Our buddy Barrett Salee, who's a relatively frequent guest here on DawgNation Daily, at CBSSports.com, took a look at all 14 SEC teams and looked at the best team all time in that program's history. For Alabama, it was like the 2011 team. For Florida, it's like the 1996 team. Vanderbilt's got an entry on this list, like the 1906 team. It's kind of hard to imagine, even more than a century ago, Vanderbilt being really good, but at one point in time, I guess they were. And then for Georgia, and I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up our SEC through and kind of transition to our Dog Day Q&A here. For Georgia, the team that gets mentioned is the 1980 team. Now, from the standpoint of on-field accomplishments, you can't deny that. It was a consensus national championship team. It included Herschel Walker, who probably should have been the Heisman Trophy winner there in 1980. But when you think of, if you could do some sort of computer simulation, if you could somehow find a way to get like the 1980 team on the field with even 2017, let's just use this past year's team for a moment. Do you think 1980 was better than 2017? Now it's a history that it's a team that deserves its sort of place in history, revered for its consensus national championship. But was it the best team in Georgia history? Was it as deep as the 2017 team? You look at some relatively close games for Georgia in 1980 compared to the blowouts that Georgia played in 2017. I don't want to veer towards sacrilege here, but I almost wonder that if a more modern team might actually be Georgia's actual all-time great team, even though the 1980 team was the consensus national champion. I actually want to make that a part of our Dog Day Q&A here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Want to invite you to weigh in on that subject. Which UGA team do you think is the greatest in program history? If you're listening to us on the radio or in podcast form, you can hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. If you're watching Facebook, YouTube, whatever, you can put a comment in the comment section right now, and we'll look forward to taking those comments as a part of our discussion here. In fact, let me dive into our Facebook comment section first, and we'll get a whole lot more coming in after that. John Wilson on the subject of Fromm maybe being overlooked, the 2017 team being overlooked. He says, Georgia's always going to be overlooked until we win a national championship, and that may be true. There may be a degree of, hey, when you have a sort of surprise party crasher like Georgia last season, there's a tendency of the mainstream media, this sort of the big bold print, blue check media, to just be a little slow in kind of catching up on that. These people are risk averse by nature. They sort of pick last year's winners to repeat and win again almost exclusively. So from that standpoint, that probably is true. And for a guy like Jake Fromm, who I think does have a chance to make a name for himself as the nation's top quarterback, that's at least at the threshold of possibility for him. This may be one of those things where the national media truly is a little slow to catch up on that. Mickey Fuqua on the Dog Day Q&A question about the all-time great Georgia team mentions 2002. And I think that 2002 is potentially a pretty interesting entrance into this conversation. That's a team that, has the loss that obviously it just, for a Gator hater like me, going to Jacksonville, losing to Florida, that night game in 2002 was a disaster. But that 2002 team was really good. Good offensive line, led the SEC in scoring, I believe. Also had, all-time great defensive players like Thomas Davis and David Pollack. The truth is that Georgia team, if you want to talk about, which is the greatest Georgia team of all time, I think you've got to really include 2002 as a strong candidate there. Had there been a playoff in 2002, I think Georgia would almost for sure have been in it. And I think that Georgia would have had a chance to do well in that conversation. So I think that 2002 is a pretty good discussion point to bring up there. We'll also get some YouTube comments here as well. Sonia Prescott says 2012 wasn't bad. And you're right. 2012 is certainly a team from Georgia that should get some consideration on this. I have to admit, for me, when I see a list of all-time great Georgia teams, despite the fact that that team almost won the national championship and really came about as close as any team, not including 2017, in the modern times winning a national championship, I actually don't have 2012 rated as high as I have, like, say, 2002 or 2017. That 2012 team did lose in pretty bad fashion on the road at South Carolina. Not really the hallmark of an all-time great team. So for me, 2012 might even be, below a couple teams in recent Georgia history. But it's our Dog Day Q&A. Look forward to having you weigh in on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, and more comments to come here on video as well. But before that, we got to take care of some business and wrap up our broadcast here today. And, of course, speaking of the Florida Gators, who I mentioned a moment ago, Georgia fans love beating Florida. They hope to do it again. And around here, we believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater. We believe that Florida is supposed to be and is Georgia's most important, Georgia's biggest rival. And 116 days from right now, we think Georgia gets another win against those lousy, stinking Gators. And our way of reminding you of how important this game is to do the Gator Hater Countdown every single day right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And 116 days from right now, Georgia gets another W. I'll also mention this, and sometimes I'm not so great at deciphering coded social media messages, but I did see some online chatter about James Cook, the running back, whose Instagram feed appears to show that he has made it to Athens. Does that mean all's well that ends well for Cook? I guess we'll find out, but Instagram seems to be telling us something. We'll see you tomorrow. And for those of you with us on video, love to hear your comments. Jeff Sentell gave us plenty to discuss. Dog Day Q&A, all-time great Georgia team. You can weigh in on that. Really anything from today on the table or anything you wanted to mention. James Cook stuff as well. We'll kind of do it all for you. Bob Fuquet, and Bob, I've butchered your name before, and I'm doing it again here. He says that Kirby would win the national championship with the 2012 team. Yeah, he might. He very well might have. I mean, that 2012 performance at South Carolina, not to bring up a bad memory, there's no point in doing that on the day before 4th of July. We're all in a good mood here. Let's try to keep it that way. But, gosh, what did they lose? 38-7 in Columbia to an average as grit South Carolina team. Now, one of the better South Carolina teams, but in comparison to the great recent SEC teams, that's not a great South Carolina team. It's a good South Carolina team, but not a great South Carolina team. And Georgia lost 38-7. Ugh. It's the same thing in 2007. And I know this is going to end up sounding like some sort of negative referendum on Richt, and it's not, because I like Mark Richt. But that 2007 team was good enough to win a national championship, too. And they lost, 37-17 at Tennessee? I mean, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I better change the subject, because now I'm getting in a sour mood. But a couple of these teams that should be in that all-time great discussion just come up just short of being there, I believe, 2007, 2012, because they've got the bad, ugly loss. All-time great teams can't have bad, ugly losses. And you could say, well, Georgia in 2017 had one at Auburn. That's true, but, Georgia had the good fortune of being able to avenge that loss in the SEC championship, which maybe is unfair. Maybe I'm stepping on my own point here. But nonetheless, it seems to make sense with me. Johnny Ivy says, what's up with James Cook? So, I got to read Bobby Weatherington's comment after this. You don't let me forget about Bobby's comment. So Johnny Ivy says, what's up with James Cook? So on Cook's Instagram, there's a picture of him in what looks to be the Fort Lauderdale airport. And then there's a picture of him, or actually not even a picture. It's like a dark black screen with like a push pin in Athens, Georgia. I have no idea if that's proof of anything. I don't. But it's at least something for one of the final members of Georgia's 2018 class to arrive in Athens. So do with that what you may and what you will. I still lean on what Jeff Sentell and Chip Towers have both said, Chip obviously covering this from the team standpoint. Jeff covering this from the recruiting standpoint. He knows the Cook family very well. I mean, Jeff has said over and over again that he doesn't see any reason for Georgia fans to be worried about Cook. If that's what Jeff is saying, then I'm going to follow suit on that. And maybe the Instagram, posts here showing him apparently in Athens, on his way to Athens, may be enough on that. All right, so I got to find Bobby Weatherington's quote. And I told you I've been having trouble with my Facebook here, but I got to try to find this. He said, BA, have you seen the NFL segment, Come On, Man? Well, I read Trayvon Walker said a Clemson coach sends him poems. Come on, man. That's Bobby Weatherington on Facebook. That is hilarious. Yeah, there's been a little bit of stuff about Clemson on the old internet here as of late. I did not know they were sending Trayvon Walker poems. I've seen Trayvon Walker, and at the risk of maybe, misunderstanding what he's really into, I can't imagine that guy's going to be swayed by a lot of really well-written poetry. He seems more like he's a poetry in motion, if you will, to borrow a pro wrestling phrase. He seems to be more the kind of guy that likes to, more about the brutality on field and the sort of magical love of language here. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the poetry is the way to Trayvon Walker's heart. The other thing I saw about Clemson, and I thought this was pretty juicy. Do y'all remember Leon O'Neal? Leon O'Neal was a safety for the class of 2018 that Georgia kind of got involved with pretty late in the process, I guess. But for a while, it seemed like Georgia had a chance at O'Neal. He was also heavily recruited by a lot of other programs. Ends up going to Texas A&M. Well, one recruit, was it N'Kobe Dean? One of y'all will know this, way before I will. I think it was N'Kobe Dean. N'Kobe Dean apparently said on Twitter that the Clemson coaches had told him that if he goes to Clemson, his first play call on the field in his first game for Clemson was going to be a blitz, highlighting his ability to rush the passer. Leon O'Neal then, quote tweets that to say, they told me the same thing, and goes on to say a not so nice thing about Clemson defensive coordinator Brent Venables. So Clemson, who has this sort of squeaky clean image, that sort of irritates me from time to time, maybe some holes in that veneer a bit there based on what Leon O'Neal said. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. All right, Jay Wise, how about this provocative comment from Jay, who says, after this year, let's revisit the best team of all time discussion, because I'm pretty sure that the best or the top two team is going to be here from 2018. I cannot wait to find out. Really good stuff from Jay Wise there. That's pretty fascinating. All right, let me hop over to YouTube here, because I haven't taken any comments from YouTube. Dapper Dan on YouTube on the subject of James Cook says that he's going to play a lot. I think the battle's going to come later between Zamir White and Holyfield for the other spot in the top three. Yeah, so I think we'd all agree, and we mentioned DeAndre Swift a little earlier, that DeAndre Swift, barring an injury, is going to get the most carries for Georgia, the running back position here, but there's still room for three. And in some games, there'll be a fourth. Even in the first quarter, Georgia's used 4 running backs before. But for the most part, it's a pecking order of 3. It's likely Swift. I'm assuming that Zamir White's number 2 there. And then I do think it's a battle here for the third spot. And I won't pretend to know how that's going to play out as of yet. I won't. But I will say that Elijah Holyfield's probably going to be pretty tough to beat out. But that's, I like Harrion too. And there's obviously tons to like about James Cook. So this is kind of a fun conversation for Georgia fans to have. Dapper Dan says that Zeus is further away from practice. And I think what he means by that is that, he's still dealing with an injury situation. He may miss some of those crucial summer practices, and that's probably a fair point. I believe that in 2016, the fact that Holyfield was dealing with an ankle injury, I do think set him back a bit. And we saw in that first game against North Carolina in Kirby Smart's first season, it's Brian Harrion who ends up getting some of those carries, and he did stuff with them. Harrion ran the ball that day. But Harrion, I think, maybe got those carries in part because of the fact that Holyfield had dealt with the ankle injury in practice there that summer. So if White is hobbled, starting and we're really only a few weeks away from actually having these practices take place, which is kind of exciting to think about. But if he is in a situation where he's not, able to, practice right away, that could slow him down for some playing time. I think the thing to remember here is that if he's as dazzling as some people think that he might be, he may not be quite as much. He may not need quite as much practice time to get himself up to speed there. Eric Smith says John Emery Jr. to UGA. I mean, listen, I read the piece at DawgNation. Based on that piece alone, it seems like a real possibility here. And would y'all agree with me that Louisiana is about as tough a state to go get a player from as there is? I mean, I believe of anything that's sort of in the SEC footprint, I believe I'd rank Louisiana last in terms of the states that you can go into. There aren't a ton of prospects there. LSU seems to have right of first refusal on them all. If Georgia, talking heavily here to 2 Louisiana running backs, I'm not saying it makes it better to get a guy from Louisiana. You just want guys who can play. You don't care where they're from. But it is that is a pretty intriguing story to kind of watch unfold here. Kirby Smart, I mean, the old rules do not apply for him, man. I'm just telling you, the old rules do not apply. There was a time where Georgia was not taking running backs from LSU and Louisiana, and now Georgia may take 2, or at least they are taking a couple, which are in the mix with a couple, which is pretty interesting. All right, Keith Folds asks on YouTube, BA, what's the big flat space in the middle of the new west end zone? So I believe what that is, and I wish we had, at one point we had the sort of computer-generated artist rendition of what the thing was going to look like. At a certain point, we're just going to go to Athens, take some pictures of all this stuff, and we'll show it to you. But I believe that flat open space is like a patio, basically, that the recruits can stand and watch the games. They're going to have the recruiting space there in that west end zone, kind of underneath those bleachers. You've also got the open space there where the team's going to run out. The team is going to run out. If you go to games, it used to be the east end zone that the team ran onto the field from, because that's where the locker room was. Georgia has had in recent years a very old. I mean, you think big time SEC football, nice locker room. In Sanford Stadium, Georgia's locker room is not, anything more than what your, high school probably has. It is just a regular, very Spartan room here with some, dry erase boards and space for players to sit. Now they get dressed, for years they got dressed at the Butts-Mehre, so that's probably where their nicer lockers were. But the regular locker room at the East End Zone in Sanford Stadium was just pretty Spartan conditions. My understanding is they're getting a much more state-of-the-art locker room now on the West End Zone side. The recruiting stuff's going to be over there too. So the different looking elements that you see for the West End Zone project here, a lot of that is going to be about the team running onto the field, and also kind of where the recruits who are being entertained, where they're housed during the game. Let me get some more comments here. Al Clemens says our backs are healthy and ready for the opening game. I guess we'll have to wait and see about Zamir White, but as I'm understanding right now, we didn't see a lot of DeAndre Swift during G-Day, but I don't think you have too much to worry about with him really either. Bullgator, our resident Florida fan, checking in on the YouTube comment section, says, I just woke up, I'm in Oregon, and I accidentally touched my screen on my phone, and this was coming on, and I've hit the snooze bar. I'm just laying here listening to the bad news. Well, Bullgator, we appreciate you checking in from Oregon, and I guess Georgia fans appreciate the fact that you feel it's bad news. That is pretty funny there. All right, let me go back over to Facebook here for a moment. Wayne Carroll says, don't get me wrong, Georgia will have a very good team in 2018, but he says 2019 will be the year. When these last 2 classes get some experience under their belt, we will be national champions. Don't doubt it. Think about it. I like that. Wayne cutting a promo there a bit. And I do think the 2019 team on paper, you can make a strong case that will be more talented than the 2018 team, because I do think it's going to solve a couple of issues that I think that Georgia has. My biggest concerns for 2018 continue to be wide receiver and continue to be defensive backs, which is not to say I think those position groups are problematic. I'm just saying in comparison to the other position groups, I still think those groups could use just a little more influx of talent. And by 2019, you're going to have a lot of that, especially at the wide receiver position when you add Blaylock and Hazelwood, and I do believe they're both still going to be a part of this Georgia class here. That could be really fun. And we briefly mentioned the pass rush yesterday, adding more, guys in the mix there, year older Brenton Cox, year older Adam Anderson, Nolan Smith in the fold there. Georgia may be really getting after the quarterback by 2019, which would be a lot of fun to think about. Jimmy Durham says, you should do the show there with Jeff when they open the West End Zone for the media. I'd actually love to do that. I think that'd be really fun, and I hope they do some sort of open house thing like that. I think that'd be really cool. I will tell you that I am old enough to remember when Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall opened, and it opened, right before the 87 season? Am I right about this? Right before the 87 season, the Butts-Mehre Heritage Hall opened, and, listen, my family was not big donors or anything like that. They just let everybody come and see it, and my grandfather and grandmother took me there that day, and I got to go on a tour of the whole thing. I have a great picture. One day I'll have to bring this in, show it to you. I got a picture of me sitting at Vince Dooley's desk. I don't know if I was supposed to go in Coach Dooley's desk or in office or not, but the door was open, so I just walked right in. I'm kind of sitting this in Coach Dooley's desk. That's kind of a cool thing. I got to go in the Georgia locker room there that day, and I got my picture taken with Lars Tate. Do y'all remember Tate, the really good Georgia running back? At the time, he was Georgia's best player and a personal hero of mine as a child, and he was nice enough to pose for a picture with me there that day. Troy Sadowski, who's sometimes in our Facebook comment section, Troy may have been on that team. So he may have some memories of all that, but I loved getting a chance to tour that when that building first opened. And I was thinking about that the other day, thinking about maybe they'll give us a chance to see the brand new West End Zone stuff here too, at least in terms of being able to shoot some video and present it to you. Of course, it'll be open to the media, after games. But it'd be kind of nice to see. All right, couple very, very quick comments. We'll get out of here. Mike Lage, and Mike, I hope I pronounced that correct, says, BA, I just moved from Arizona to Savannah. So happy to be in Dawg Nation. Well, Mike, we're glad to have you back in the Peach State here as well. Excited about that. Randy Adams says, please discuss our punting. I am very excited about the future of Jake Camarda. I think there's a chance that that Camarda could be a very good punter. And obviously, Georgia's got a couple options there. But Camarda, I think, could be really pretty fun. All right, we got to go. A lot of comments coming in. Chris Branham says, hope you all have a happy 4th of July. Chris, you do the same. Hope you all enjoy the holiday. Don't forget, we are off tomorrow, but we'll be back on Thursday, just like always, with a regular edition of our program, regular schedule. Hope that you will be with us then, and hope you have a great time with family and friends tomorrow. Enjoy some good food, some good time, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Right here on DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza.